You know that feeling when you see something and you just wish more than anything that you could unsee it? Yeah, that. So this film is basically about an American woman who comes to England on a nannying job, and the driver who's driving her to the mansion that she's going to be staying at stares at her tits. It's basically the first shot of the film. She gets inside, and there is a grocery delivery guy who starts flirting with her by saying, you guessed it, that he was a clairvoyant. Anyway, he proceeds to falsely guess her past twice before saying that he in fact can read chewing gum. The woman Greta was chewing gum, and she took it out of her mouth and put it in his hand, and he read her chewing gum. Fuck, does mouthwash even have alcohol in it? And then this old couple comes in and introduce Greta to the kid that she's meant to be nannying. But it's not a kid.
And this is our son, Brahms.
Oh, one sec. So it's a doll she's meant to be babysitting, and the old woman says that Brahms, which is the doll's name...
He wants you, Miss Evans. He's chosen you, if you'll have him.
And she smiles, and she accepts the job. And it just doesn't... It just doesn't make any sense. It was another film that was just carried entirely by the soundtrack, the sound effects. There's a point in the movie where the doll's head moves slightly to the right, and the sound effect accompanying it sounded like a piano filled with concrete being pushed off a building.
Jesus.
That wasn't even the most ridiculous part. The parents of this doll left Greta behind so that they could go and commit tandem suicide by putting rocks in their pockets and walking into a body of water. So the doll starts moving around, or so Greta thinks, and she gets freaked out and starts to read it poetry and kiss it goodnight and treat it with respect, where before she just put a sheet over it and said it looked creepy. And like, all I could think of was when Greta thought that the doll had stolen her dress, these tiny impotent little doll hands like taking the dress down, and it's just not scary at all. It's a well-known horror technique to leave things up to the imagination. Most movies that are good have done that in some part. But when I'm imagining a little doll running around the house like this, you have failed in your attempt at scaring me. I'm sorry. Being overt in horror films works sometimes. Being covert works as well. Neither of these techniques worked for this film. As it turns out, Brahms is actually a real person and has lived in the walls for 20 years since he killed this girl that came over to play with him. And when you realize that the doll isn't possessed by the spirit of, you know, the dead kid, but the kid is still alive and living in the walls, in retrospect, the movie makes absolutely no fucking sense. For instance, how did the doll's head move? How did a grown-ass man that is now 28 move around the house so seamlessly? And why would he move the doll around and risk getting seen? I mean, it's a murder conviction that he's waiting on. How did Greta not notice anything going on? How did she not see a 28-year-old guy moving around the house? Like, the writers can explain Brahms's behavior by saying he was odd, which they did. But it would seem that Brahms's behavior was actively bent around setting up a red herring so that Greta would think that the doll was possessed. And it just seems like a massive fucking cop-out.
Who's hungry? I am.
Overall, I rate this film one can of cream of mushroom soup, a bottle of mouthwash, and what's that? Undigested tuna. We're now accepting submissions of horror flash fiction under 1,500 words that will feature in a horror fiction podcast on the channel periodically. If you're interested in finding out more, there's a link in the description. Alternatively, if you've got a true paranormal story, we're putting together a segment compiling viewer-submitted ghost stories. Follow the link on the screen to an instructional video detailing how to submit your story.